We'll be chatting with Molly Walsh, who is the author of that book, and also we'll be joined in a little bit by Eamon Ryan, who is the Minister for Communications, for Environment, Climate and Communications, who'll be joining us as well. And we also have Derry O'Donnell, who's here from Community Power, Ireland's first and only community-owned electricity supply company. I am Kate. I work with Friends of the Earth here in Ireland, and I'd like to welcome you all here this evening to join our webinar. Just to let everybody know, it's being recorded. I need to do too much stuff, but just to let everybody know, you can use the chat as you're coming in to say hello. Maybe you might pop in where you're coming from today, and maybe just something about where you're coming from that you're particularly grateful for or thankful for in your own area. We also have a Q&A, and we will be taking questions at the end. There's an option there where you can vote up questions. So if someone asks a question and you like it, then you can vote it up. So we'll get to those ones faster. Yeah, that's it really. I see loads of people are putting in where they're from, which is lovely. Nice to see people coming in from all over Ireland. I know there are a few from outside of Ireland too, which is also wonderful. This is a book about European energy communities, so hopefully we'll get to see and talk. Hopefully there's a few Europeans in there as well. Okay, without further ado, I think I'll pass over to the lovely Molly Walsh, and I'll stop talking. Thank you.
Thanks, Kate, and thanks so much for inviting me. It's really nice to be in Ireland, even if it's only virtually. And yeah, I'm going to go ahead now and share my screen, and I have some slides for you because I really want to show you this book. So is that okay? You see the first slide? Great. Okay. My title slide. So who am I? Yeah, Kate introduced me, but I used to work for Friends of the Earth Ireland. I started as an intern in 2008, and there is an old extract from the Friends of the Earth Ireland website about me. It says, I studied environmental biology in UCD, that I'm from Donegal, and that I like cooking, gardening, and cycling long distance. All of those things are still true, except I don't work for Friends of the Earth Ireland anymore. Now I work in Brussels for Friends of the Earth Europe. And yeah, Kate introduced me as one of the authors of this book, which is very kind. And of course, I didn't write this book alone. But there was a lot of jokes at the start of lockdown in March, and people said, okay, now it's time to write your masterpiece. And so we had a lot of events that were cancelled because we couldn't hold them. So we decided to use this time to kind of calm down a bit and bring together and synthesize a lot of the knowledge that exists across Europe on community energy. So we did this book with two of our key partners. We work with ResCop, and that's the European Network of Energy Cooperatives. And they are the people on the ground trying to do it, and in many cases succeeding. And we work with Energy Cities, which is a network of city councils who are owning renewable energy. And many people have managed to succeed in community energy projects, and they learned a lot along the way. And sometimes I would hear from people who work in ResCop some of the same advice coming back. And it kind of existed there as kind of, yeah, in an oral tradition, but it wasn't consolidated anywhere. So we decided we would try and do that and put this book together. And this book is really it's a handbook and it's a toolkit, but it's also a call to action for you. And when you have it in your hand, we hope that it will guide you to getting involved in renewable energy ownership. And it's really cool in the chat to see so many projects signing in and saying where you're joining from. And there is a really European-wide movement of people who are trying to participate in the energy transition, because we think that this energy transition shouldn't be for the big corporations. We think that it should benefit communities. I mean, especially when we need to live with the impacts of something like a wind farm, we think that the benefits should go to the communities. And we were also able to get this book quite nicely designed. So one of the reasons that I have a presentation today is I just wanted to show you how colorful and engaging the book is, and hopefully encourage you to get a look at it. Here's Eamon joining. Kate will have to change his name from. It's quite substantial. It's first thing to say maybe is that it's free. It's free to download now. So I think it's going to be popped in the chat. But it's quite substantial. It kind of like growing over the summer into a much bigger book. It's 160 pages, 26 chapters. And each chapter has a find out more section at the end. So it actually links to over 80 additional resources. And we included success stories, so something to inspire you, because when every community energy project hits barriers, we want to show you that another community's been there before you and got over those barriers. So the tone is as inspiring as we can make it. And I just wanted to share with you now 2 of those stories, which I think are quite inspiring. One is from not far from here, from Ireland, in Edinburgh. And it's a solar cooperative. It's a community solar project. But it's a collaboration between a cooperative and the local council. And actually in our work, we found that those are the most effective projects. The 2 different parts bring really important skills. And the next success story I'll show you is also a collaboration. So they put solar panels on the roofs of 24 buildings that are owned by the council. So schools, libraries, the swimming pool is now heated partially by solar energy. And the whole project has a generating capacity of 1.4 megawatts. So it's quite substantial. And the profits are returned both to the members of the cooperative and to the local community. So no one's getting rich off this project. The next success story is a wind one, and it's the story of Eeklo in Belgium, not very far from where I am here in Brussels. They call it a city, but it's really a very kind of small town. Like, well, now actually I can't name any Irish towns. I don't want to offend anyone, but it's a small, not very interesting town. But they do have a really interesting city council who are interested in renewable energy. And they work with people in energy poverty as well. So it's not just for them to have a nice renewable energy project. They also want to tackle inequalities. And so in Belgium, if you're in energy poverty, if you're struggling to pay your bills, you get put on a pay-as-you-go meter. So you have to pay before you use your electricity. And actually, it's one of the most expensive per kilowatt hour that you can pay. Well, the city worked with those people to get them off those meters and get them being supplied by the cooperative supplier, EcoPower. And the city bought their share in the cooperative, which is €250. And the household pays it back then on the savings on their energy bill. And then the household, which was formerly in energy poverty, now has a share in the wind farm, which is also owned by the cooperative and the city. They're also constructing a new district heating network. And in the tender for that, they put a minimum of 30% citizen ownership. So they're also starting now to do heat. Something that will also be useful for you is there's a chapter on barriers, a specific chapter in the book to help you overcome the barriers that all community energy projects face. Because part of what we saw sometimes is people get disillusioned, or people get easily deterred when they come up against barriers that they weren't expecting. So we wanted to make sure that people were already armed with the knowledge of the barriers they'll face, and some tools on how to get over them. And it covers 7 of the key barriers that we saw a lot of projects facing. Now, as useful as I think this book can be, I wish that we didn't need 160 pages to tell you how to start a community energy project. I wish it was just a 4-page step-by-step guide, because I wish it was politically much easier. And now here I want to move away from the book a little bit and tell you briefly about demanding political action on community ownership. So ways that we can make community ownership more possible with political change. And something that I worked on a few years ago was a Renewable Energy Directive. So this is an EU directive, and it gives rights to people to be part of a community energy project. And it means that every member state of the EU has to support the development of community energy. So it was quite a big win at the European level, but now we need to make it bite in the member states. We need to make it bite in the national context. And here's what I'm here to tell you that you can try to get from your national government. And I apologize for moving away from the cute illustrations to some text from a directive. There's only 2 slides like this. This, I just wanted to show you what's actually in it. This is all text here exactly from the Renewables Directive. So the red is my emphasis, but I just want to show you how strong it is. Member states shall provide an enabling framework to promote and facilitate the development of renewable energy communities. So for an EU directive, it's very clear and it's very straightforward. And this has to be put into national law by June 2021, so in just over 6 months. And then that other text, the framework shall include, that's also text from the directive. So it's very clear and very strong about what needs to be done. Unjustified barriers should be removed. There needs to be tools to facilitate access to finance. So every country has to set up an enabling framework. That's what the Renewables Directive says. But you'll have to demand it, because national governments aren't going to do it just because it's in a directive. Technically they have to, but you also need to make sure that there's the pressure coming from you as well, and that you're watching Eamon Ryan and making sure that he does that. Every enabling framework in every country is going to be different. So what needs to be done to support community energy in Hungary is not the same as it should be in Ireland. So how should we know what kind of legal framework to put in place? Well, the directive also has provided for that. This here in italics is also from the directive. Member states shall carry out an assessment of the existing barriers and potential of development of renewable energy communities. So we think this is really useful, and we want all of you activists here in the room to look out for this and demand it. Because once your ministry sets out what the barriers are, and once they make a good assessment of them, then it's much more easier to create the right kind of framework. Now, Ireland's a little bit behind on this. In Spain and Austria, already assessing what these barriers are. In Spain today, they ended their public consultation on putting this directive in place. So the directive isn't going to solve everything, but it's a very useful tool for you to have as the Irish community energy movement to demand more rights and a better legal framework. Which takes me to my last slide, and I didn't even get interrupted by Kate on time. And yeah, there's my contact details and the 2 things I want you to do after this webinar. Make sure that you hold the Irish government to account on these rights for communities and the legal framework to support them. You have these rights under EU law, make sure that you get them. And yeah, read the book. So nice to see people from all over Ireland joining. Advice in there: take the first steps together with some people in your community. And there's my email. I'm happy to hear from people, especially Irish people, about the book.
Super. Thanks, Molly. Thanks so much. Karen is going to put the link to the book into the chat. Karen, maybe, I know you've already done it, but as people are joining, maybe you could just sporadically throw it in there. Karen is working with us in Friends of the Earth, and she's in the background there today. It's a really beautiful book, actually. It's very easy to read. It's really nice, and it really shows you how to start a community energy group, why you might want to join one, and looking at what other communities have done, like the ones we looked at earlier there in Scotland and in the wind one. Cool. Before we move on to Minister Ryan, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to let you speak in a minute. Before we do that, I just thought I would take a poll of our audience. We have actually 185 people on the call today, and I just wanted to see how you are in terms of your whether you're in a community or not. So I'll just pop this up on the screen, and you can answer it if you want to take part. We'll see the answers really quick. I don't know if you can all see the results to that. So a lot of you are already in renewable energy communities, which is great. Some of you would like to join and you know how to find one. The majority of you would like to be in one, you don't know quite where to find one. And some of you, about 9%, don't know any, you might start one yourself. Excellent. That's the results there as they came through. Thanks very much for joining us, Minister. There's no doubt that our challenge is huge, our climate challenge is huge. And I suppose as a society, we need to completely change how we travel, how we heat our homes, how we power our businesses. And in Ireland, we have a long way to go. We're still using fossil fuels for about 90% of our energy. So we definitely have a huge challenge ahead of us, one that I'm confident we are ready to meet. Perhaps I could start by asking you to tell us or paint us a picture of what our energy system needs to look like to be in line with our climate commitments, and how you see the role of communities and citizens in that transition.
Hi, Kate and Molly and everyone else. Our system will be 100% renewable, and it'll be all about efficiency, demand side. There's a revolution taking place, and it's towards a better system. It's a huge challenge, but in the energy side particularly, it's not impossible to see it happening because it's a better system. It's more secure, it's more local, it's cleaner, it's more economic. So this is not. There are various challenges. Transport's tricky, and agriculture is tricky, but energy less so. And less so as well because I think there's broad political agreement, which helps, because it will still take 2 or 3 decades, and so it's 5 or 6 or 7 governments, and it's large capital investment, so you don't want to stop starting. So that political agreement is very significant in my mind. Now that doesn't mean it's easily deliverable or meet. We've all agreed politically that at least 50,000 houses a year need to be retrofitted. We've all agreed that at least 70%, 30. Perhaps we could go further. Getting 50,000 householders to do that to their home is a bigger challenge. Working out the grid and the planning and the financing of that and of the renewables is more of a challenge than the political commitment to it, in my mind. A couple of other thoughts, if I can, just to share. I think it's very much that there's a digital revolution taking place, there's a clean energy revolution, and there's a transport revolution, and all three are interconnected. The digital revolution is really central to what's going to happen in the energy side. If you look at how you manage this grid system, a lot of it's about data, And I think that's connected to this community ownership issue, because who owns the data, or who's sharing the data, and who controls that, what the rules, what are the ethics around it, they connect across. But also then when it comes to the transport revolution that's taking place, that's also community in my mind, because it will be about a lot more shared transport services, and it'll also be about using that clean power in that transport system. And in all this, come back to what I was saying at the very start, it is about the dance between supply and demand. It's about variable supply being met by variable demand, and that balancing being the real characteristic of why this system is going to be better. And lastly, I'd say maybe this is why I think community energy is important. There's a whole variety of different reasons. But one of the characteristics of this power, this new energy revolution, is it is a distributed power system that's not as energy dense. Like fossil fuels are remarkably energy dense. Wind and solar and geothermal or biomass or other renewable sources don't have that energy density, but they're everywhere. They're distributed in a very different way, in a very dispersed way. And one of the reasons why community makes sense is because that centralized nature of fossil fuel in energy or nuclear leads to a centralized ownership system. There's the possibility and the prospect in this new energy system that we can change the ownership system to reflect the distributed nature of the power system. Sorry if that's very broad, but it is the kind of underlying one of the reasons why I think it makes sense for us to broaden the ownership at the same time as we switch to this new system.
No, that makes perfect sense. And I suppose as all users of energy, we have as much a role in how it's generated. We should have as much a role in how it's generated and how it's used, and we have a very powerful role in that. And as technology improves, supply and demand management is going to become more and more important. We have a smart meter rollout in Ireland that's happening already, and some houses have already been able to avail of the smart meter, and that is going to change how we as customers can interact with the energy market. And I suppose gratefully in the energy sector, technology does exist. We have wonderful renewable resources and technology now to capture that and turn that into usable power. But I suppose as well, if it was as simple as a quick technological fix, it would have happened already by now. And there are societal challenges as well as that. It's not as easy as just a technological fix, sadly. And it also raises questions about cost and affordability and fairness, and about who benefits from our renewable resources, our wind and our solar power. And also I think it's very important about who's leading the transition. And I think the answers to those questions, if we can understand affordability and cost and fairness and who leads it, is going to drive how fast or how slow this happens. And for communities and for citizens in Ireland and in other places, but particularly in Ireland, there are quite a lot of policies and legislation that makes it very difficult for us to be those empowered prosumers or empowered energy citizens. And it's your job as Minister, and we're very grateful for it, to lead on the transposition of this energy directive, which does give us new rights. Can you maybe tell us some of the things that are going to change under your watch, or what are you particularly focused on in order to kind of allow those rights for citizens and energy communities, like sharing and selling energy, about enabling connections into the grid, about support, about financing?
Okay, well, maybe
give us an indication of what we might see.
I could be very careful. I could speak for a long time here now, but in no particular order of priority or importance, but just some reflections. Firstly, on that distributed side, on the kind of smaller scale, the need for that is, or for that focus is when we're going to have to electrify everything in transport, and we're going to have to electrify heat, it seems to me. And if you look at the real challenge around that, on an urban street, or even at row of semi-Ds, the real challenge will be when you have a heat pump, which I think will be the primary heat supply system for houses, and electric vehicle, which will be the primary power system for cars. How does our distribution system manage to distribute it? That if every house has a heat pump, every house has a car, which is the case in a lot of our suburbs, how do you actually manage that at the distribution level? It's going to be a real challenge. And I think there it's about the home energy management system, allowing things to turn on and off. I know this is obvious, but that's where the first key challenge we have to get right. And that has to be citizen-centered ownership of data and control of the system. If I could cite one example, Molly gave a Belgian example. I was always very much inspired by a Belgian company, community energy company, Eeklo, because they were doing stuff on the large generation side, pooling money to build a wind turbine or a big solar farm or other. But they were also I thought it was very interesting that they were involved in the supply side. So you were cooperative, which was about that house level, what sort of supply system you had. That's one thing I think is important. Second thing I'd say in that is that we really have to and will open up microgeneration as a real possibility, because part of the answer to that domestic problem is having solar panels on the roof, having batteries, having storage capability, having, that it's completely changed the arguments that, you couldn't have microgeneration because it might undermine the grid. Is not, in my mind, is history now. We need it to support the grid. Thirdly, and it's often forgotten about, but if I was saying what we really need to develop, and this is maybe doesn't get the same attention, but the potential from district heating to be part of that equation is critical. And how we design that through good regulations, through good planning, it lends itself towards a cooperative energy model, because by definition, you're connected to the one heating system for hot water or indeed heating. And I think we need to just learn from the countries which are experienced in district heating and are really rolling it out now. That's one part of the whole solution. Lastly, if I can, go back to what I was saying earlier on, which I think is true, that this sort of distributed aspect of this power supply system is very true. There is an issue around affordability, and there is physics or an economics that is evolving that shows that large-scale renewables people are able to bid in auctions to deliver that at a price that we can't do at a local level. It was funny, 10 or 15 years ago, I might have said, well, I think micro wind might work. But the likes of friends of mine like Quentin Gargan and others have tried and tested, and it seems like the physics is beating it. On the affordability side, it'll work in very specific applications, very windy areas, very critical energy network areas. But in general, larger has become cheaper. And so therefore, when it comes to that system, what can we do? Well, I think we should and will look at the sort of mechanisms again they have in Denmark and elsewhere, where you can stitch community ownership into large projects, community owning or open access for citizens to own a share of a large project. Developers don't mind that, in my experience, because where the capital comes from is not their big challenge. It's getting through planning and getting through the kind of grid and all those other elements. But secondly, we had set up the res auctions to generate that more competitive, cheaper power from larger scale developments. Within that, we had in the first res auction 7 applications that were successful. 2 were 100% community owned, 5 were a hybrid mix of community and a developer taking a 49% share. And I think we need those sort of structures when it is for larger scale. It's not microgeneration. I'm hopeful that the next auction that will really expand. It is limited, and Molly, I suppose, and we'll have to maybe work on this together at the European community political level, because we were actually restricted by European competition and other rules towards that community percentage ownership of that large scale power supply being under the community structure. So I'm particularly keen that we do in that 2%. It really does build up the community end of it, the fully community owned kind of led developed projects, because there's still a very large market for developers led projects in the wider 98%. So that they're.
I'll just come in for a second, actually, because I have actually a positive news story about Ireland, which is that I think Ireland is becoming an envy of many places across Europe, because we managed to get past the DG competition rule makers at a European level going through state aid. And I know that it was actually a significant challenge for the civil servants in the department to do that, but they were successful. And I think that's opened a gate for others to follow now throughout the rest of Europe, to have separate community pots within auctions, so that communities aren't actually being forced to compete on an even playing field with developers, where we know that that's not an even playing field at the end of the day, because developers obviously have lots of different projects where they can spread the risk. They don't mind where the specific ones come out. Communities are more interested in the project that they're invested in, the one that's in their area, the one that they own, and they usually only have one. So that is a huge success. Would you mentioned there about the next auction having more community and developer partnerships, which would be very welcome, but also a separate pot where it would be maybe 100% or 100% community owned. Is that likely to? Are we likely to see that in the next auction? I think in this one it was still, the community pot was still only 51% community owned. It was a partnership approach there.
And we'll have to wait and see what works, because in truth, a lot of maybe one of the auctions, one of the risks or downsides in auctions is you can get people through, or projects through auctions, but then people find, well, maybe I bid so low that I can't actually finance it, or for whatever other reason projects mightn't be delivered. So we'll have to look and see. Hopefully all those 7 will go through, along with the other projects coming from developers. Some will fall out, more on the solar side, probably in the wind side. Solar is only really starting up, and we're learning what works, but I hope they will all go ahead. And as I think I said at the auction, at the results when you were there, I was saying, our instinct is in that 2% category. We really want a very strong community involvement. That there's a very large area for developer-led projects. It is really to start over the long term, building up this real capability and capacity at community level to lead our projects, and to learn by doing, and then spread the word and see where we go from there.
Super. And I'll just ask one more question, and before I maybe take a few from the Q&A box, because there's loads of them coming in. And also, I just want everybody to know that I'm very grateful for the Minister to be here today, because I do know that you're between votes and at any moment may have to run away and do that. And so I really appreciate you taking the time and doing that multitasking. But I'm sure it's part of your daily life. I don't know how you do it. When we think about building a community energy project, of course, it has to make business sense. And at the moment, that doesn't happen. It can't really happen in Ireland because anything that's smaller than 500 kilowatts can't even participate in this auction. So it doesn't have a potential to get a payment for their price. You can't sell your excess renewable electricity. So you can't really build a business around small scale generation if you can't sell it and you can't share it. You just have to use all of it on site. And that's quite difficult. And in particular, buildings, like I'm very passionate about solar panels going into communities and being on schools, their demand profile isn't so that they can use everything and make that efficient. They do need that sharing of electricity and being able to sell it at times when they're not using it, like at weekends or in the summer. That's one of the rights that the EU is giving to us, or has given to us. It should be by middle of June of next year. How likely is that?
I think before that, I'll be cracking the whip and to get it before then, because we've been talking about this for so long. I mean, God Almighty, we're talking about this for 15 years. I did introduce it last time as a minister. We put in a support price for microgeneration for 19 cents it was then, which if we got today, anyone would bite my hand off. But no, it is, and that sort of microgeneration projects, they don't go into auctions. That doesn't need an auction. That just needs the capability to export when own use is fully used up, or when there's a low demand. So, and I think it is. I mean, I'm going to memory here now, but I asked EirGrid a year ago for some figures on, what could we get if we. And I'm trying to remember the figures, but it wasn't to get 5% of electricity. If I remember rightly, they were talking about something like 50,000 businesses and 500,000 houses, something like that, with the solar panel on the roof. Like, not an impossible objective. And 50,000 businesses or barns, farmers with, and that would give us 5% of electricity. And going back to what I was saying earlier on, the real key in this is the balancing of power and variable supply and demand. The real attractive thing, particularly with solar in Ireland, is that it tends to balance well with wind. It smooths out the curve. and also tends to balance higher daytime peak demand and so on. So no, solar, and particularly solar for export, for domestic microgeneration, and for business, and particularly I think for solar rooftop for commercial operations has to be. It's time we start rolling this out at scale. That 5% power supply as part of our 2030 target is absolutely minimal, I would have said.
Very
I mean,
good.
we're actually going to bust those targets, because actually we can do offshore wind, I think, quicker and bigger. So but the advantage of the microgeneration, well, A, it's community, but B, is it strengthens the distribution grid, in my mind.
One of my favorite offshore projects is offshore of Copenhagen, and I learned about it first from David Connolly, who's now the chair of the Irish Wind Energy Association, and he was speaking about it years ago when he said he was working in Copenhagen, or somewhere in Denmark, not in Copenhagen, and he used to fly in from Ireland, and he would see it, and that was what inspired him to actually buy some shares in it. There are 20,000 Danish people invested in that wind farm, which is just off the coast of Copenhagen, and it's a partnership between a developer and this very enormous cooperative. And I think that there's real potential for us to do that here in Ireland, because we obviously have a wonderful offshore resource. It's about harnessing it, I suppose, and making sure that that wonderful resource is actually shared by the people of Ireland in the first instance, as we all. It's the wind that blows over our heads, and I feel like Irish people should be benefiting from it, and we will. I just have one final question. I'm going to actually let Derry in for a minute, because you were saying we need to start rolling solar out at scale, but there's another little barrier in the way. It's actually not your responsibility, that's preventing solar from being rolled out at scale, and that's about planning permission, and schools and community buildings have to get planning permission for however many solar panels they want to put up, even if it's just one, which is a significant additional cost and time, and administrative hurdle for those buildings to go through. But even businesses and homes can only put up a certain amount. Now, that regulation was due to be changed by the end of the last year, and it didn't happen. And I think it's going to be delayed quite significantly again, because there's a need for exclusion zones around airports, which is delaying it quite significantly. Now, there aren't that many airports in Ireland, and the exclusion zones can't be that big, but that's one hurdle that, unless that's fixed, I can't see us rolling out solar at scale on rooftops.
That'll be fixed very shortly, I'm confident. Just explain to people, you think, what's this got to do with airports? It is just in areas like Portmarnock, whatever, if you're on the one way in, that they're worried about glare and pilots' sight being caught. So, but no, I think a lot of what we're going to need to do, just to put this in context, scale of what we have to do. Like, the offshore wind is a 40 to 50 billion euro project. I think we'll very much control the grid side of it, but it will be largely private developers, and hopefully with a component where people can, just like David Connolly did, invest. Is how I see that developing. When it comes to the retrofitting of houses and public buildings alone in the next year, it's about a 9 billion euro investment. In the domestic private sector, it's something like 40 to 50 billion. In social housing, another 5, 9, 10 billion euros. It's beyond compare the scale of investment we need to make. There will be a lot of other areas where we look to see things happening, be it district heating, or be it microgeneration, or be it commercial buildings, where what we will look to do is change the planning laws, improve the building regulations, change the rules, so that you say to commercial developers, well, listen, you've got this rented property, but in 5 years' time, if you want to rent it, you're going to have this level of standard. Or we say to local councils, when you're putting in planning applications for new housing or development or apartments development, well, we would like you to put in as a stipulation of the planning that you put in a district heating system. So I think that is in ways a lot of what I think government can help, is just by good regulation say, this is the new norm. These are the new standards, and let people in their own ingenuity and in their own communities and in their own business opportunities evolve solutions to it. Now, a lot of it will be, the state will have to fund a lot of grants for, a whole range of different, particularly in the retrofitting in houses with lower income communities. But a lot of what we can do is by just good planning, good regulations, taking best practice internationally, applying it here. And I think that's what I'll be focusing on in the next few years, as well as kind of getting a higher budget, using the climate action fund and so on. But a lot of it can be done by good regulation too.
Great. Thank you so much. We're getting a lot of questions in. I think I'm trying to answer most of them. We've had a lot of questions about RES and the percentage of the community auction. We've had a lot of questions about microgen being paid, which I think we've answered, and about making it compulsory or not for roofs to have solar panels fitted. I don't know if it actually is compulsory in new buildings to have, as we're talking about energy regulations there, to have renewable energy installed in it. We have a lot of questions in about data centres as well, which I might get you to answer at the end if you have some time. One of the top question at the moment is actually about energy efficiency being the first fuel, and community energy cannot just be about energy generation. Of course it's not. In fact, in Ireland, I think most of our community energy groups have started from a place of energy efficiency, and that certainly has been the focus of the Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland when they started their renewable energy communities. And I think we're only starting to move into the community energy generation space. I do think it's a combination of both. Not one or the other, actually. I think we need to be doing both. I'm actually speaking today, shameless plug here, for the Tipperary Energy Agency, because I'm speaking today from my newly renovated super home, which I got done over the summer, which is fabulous now. It was challenging at the time because I had to move out of the house, and that wasn't very easy, but otherwise it is now a wonderful experience. But it's to get the whole of the country to go through that. We're going to need a lot of push factors, but the benefits are phenomenal, because the house here was really, really old and very, very cold, and now it's a lovely even temperature, heated by a heat pump, and powered, I will say, by community power, because that's who I get my electricity from. So we're running our webinar this evening from Community Power, who are the electricity supplier of Ireland. And I think I'll just let Derry come in and give a little shameless plug about community power, and then we'll go back to some questions, if that's all right, and if you have the time.
I might have to leave shortly, Kate. Unfortunately, I'm getting a signal here from my colleagues. But if you let Jerry in, and I'll try and wrap up by answering a few of those questions in the one response.
Okay, super.
Yeah, I'm also powering my my talk on community power. So I suppose for anybody who isn't aware of community power, it originated from Temporary Wind Farm, which was the first community-owned wind farm in Ireland. And the idea came about around 2000, and it took about 12 years to eventually start producing energy. So around 2012, it started generating power from 2 wind turbines, which are community-owned. So it's taken up until now, I guess, then with the Renewable Electricity Support Scheme, the RES auction, for other community projects to be able to benefit from, to develop their own renewable energy projects. So as part of that, then Community Power are involved in supporting communities around Ireland with that. The 2 communities that are 100% owned that the Minister mentioned there, one in Claremorris and one just outside Tuam in Galway, they were both supported by Community Power, and they're 100% community owned renewable energy projects, 2 solar farms. So I suppose what we would like to do is develop more similar projects around the country, and to do that, to enable us to do that, we'd like lots of people to switch their electricity supply to community power, and that enables us to help other communities develop their own projects. Switching is easy, just you can do it online on the website communitypower.ie. You just need your MPRN number, which you'll get off your electricity bill, and just a meter reading. And yeah, it takes about 5 minutes to sign up. There's no contract. You're not tied in for 12 months. the prices are fair. You know, it's not going to be hiked up after 12 months or anything like that. You know, and it's all totally transparent. But I suppose the main thing is it's owned by communities, and everybody. You know, it's all about supporting communities. If you visit the website communitypower.ie, you can have a look and see the different member communities that are involved with us there. It was mentioned earlier as well about you know, kind of a distributed network of electricity supply. That's something Community Power has been working on as well. It's a community-based virtual power plant, and during the summer, along with other partners like Tipperary Energy Agency, who've been involved from the very beginning with Temporary Wind Farm and other member communities, working on this CVPP project, and it actually won Citizens Award in the EU Sustainable Energy Week back during the summer. So that was a great recognition of all the work that's been done by Community Power. So yeah, look, if anybody wants to, if I saw a couple of people saying, putting up messages that they've switched and signed to Community Power, that's fantastic. Everyone's welcome. We don't have the big, massive marketing budget that other big utilities have, so we rely a lot on word of mouth. So if people can tell their family, friends, co-workers, everybody about it, you know, it will enable us to help other communities to get involved. And the website address is up there over my, I'm trying to do like a weather forecast here now, find it, but it's communitypower.ie for anyone that wants to switch.
Great, thanks, Terry. I see loads of customers here, so it's it's a friendly audience, I suppose. There's a lot of questions in here about energy conservation and energy policy, and I was just wondering if I could go back to Molly for a minute. If of your experience across Europe, is how are communities getting involved with renewable energy generation or energy conservation? Which comes first, or what's your experience in that?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different kinds of community energy project, and you can see that in the book. And yeah, a lot of projects, if they can't manage to set up a wind farm straight away, which can be quite complex, often they start on energy efficiency and shared energy savings. So it could be in like a big apartment block, that they retrofit the whole thing at the same time, which needs quite a lot of community work to get everyone to agree to that. But it makes a lot of sense. And yeah, the thing that I mentioned in Eeklo, where they work with those who are in energy poverty to get them to cut down their usage. Maybe while I have the word, I just throw in another last question for Eamon, because you said that you were really impressed by EcoPower. And what we tried to do with the directive was create the kind of framework in other countries so that they had in Flanders when they started. So I'd like to hear what your idea is for the enabling framework for community energy in Ireland that your ministry has to put in place sometime in the next 6 months.
Okay. Well, without at risk of giving another plug to Community Power, which Derry O'Donnell has just done very effectively, I do think our regulatory system is designed to create both that supply and generation company model, because as I said, I think it is both, and our both is, well, even as I understand, and this is into the real weeds now, the technical aspects of this, when some of these community operations scale up, or in any electricity business, there is an advantage sometime in having both a supply business and a generation business, that you actually can balance. There are certain efficiencies, even as it were, or economic benefits that come from having both a customer supply base. Now, this is highly complex when you get into that level, but that's one of the reasons I thought it was impressive. And my sense of that goes back about 7 or 8 years ago, and I met EcoPower when they were growing in Belgium. And it just seemed to me it was a model that was in tune with that balance, that balanced approach. So I don't see anything in our regulatory system which restricts that. The fact that Community Power were successful in a recent auction with 2 examples makes the point. The fact that Kate and other people I've watched in the chat function are able to choose that customer option, that is now a real option that is supported by the Irish regulatory system. Can I say one thing though, just and this is to to answer, Kate, your various questions, including the questions about data centres, because that's a real issue. They're not small. They're not switching on and off to in a really flexible type way. They're very large energy demand centres. They are also critical for the digital revolution we need to help drive the efficiency. If you look at the European economic plan, von der Leyen's plan, the Green Deal, it is digital and green and switch to renewable electricity. And data centers are needed as part of the whole digital revolution, and indeed the system of managing these power systems. I think the real question is, can we make sure in the modeling for the number of data centers or the location of them that they're within an entire circular economic, zero carbon, sustainable managed system? It's not that we're going to shut down data centers or say, no, we can't have data centers. We will need some data centers to run the digital part of this revolution. But the question is, can they be done in a way that is zero carbon, so that the concerns that people rightly have about the this kind of a seeming contradiction, we're all going zero carbon, but the demand of our data centers drive us into an unsustainable approach. It can't. I believe we can, though, at scale, and this is large-scale development and thinking. With the development of 5 gigawatts of offshore power in the Irish Sea and 30 gigawatts at least of power in floating, probably wind in the northwest, west, southwest, there is actually a power supply coming to us, which will allow us to have that sort of economic plan where you can say, yeah, this is 100% sustainable, it's 100% zero carbon. And that is now a very viable option. And it's part, even to make it work, to think really big now, it's part of a wider project, which is balancing that supply, not just on the island, but with our neighbouring island and with the continent and beyond. And it's that scale of ambition is where we are going in Europe and in Ireland towards, and we need that to provide the economic system that is viable. Lastly, if I could, but to go back very local, in terms of how this works here, I think you mentioned it, Kate, those 200 communities, the sustainable energy communities. I think that SEAI have done very good work, often on restricted resources. In truth, both in my department and in SEAI, we all know that it's been, it hasn't had the resources that are commensurate with the need that we have, and the scale of the challenge and the scale of the change we need to make. One of the things we did in the budget, which I hope will help, is we got funding for current funding for a radically increased investment in SEAI staff. I think it's an additional 50 or so staff, and the similar sort of numbers additional in the energy section, particularly within the department. They need it. You often have a single principal officer running kind of thing that 10 people should be doing. So we're going to invest in that. Similarly, we've just changed the legislation so that the climate fund is going to get funding from the NORA levies that we raise on sales of petrol and diesel for security purposes. And the investment in that is started in areas like district heating or EV charging points. But one of the things I would hope to do in the near future is to invest some of that funding in community strength, in community capability, in local authorities. That's one of the areas where we've probably, again, resource restrictions, in PPN networks where community organizations can contribute, and in the likes of Tipperary Energy Institute you mentioned, or Codema, or other kind of regional, probably, energy agencies that have expertise that they are able to support the scale of transition in both the built environment, in generation, in efficiency, in a range of different ways. So I'm hoping that next focus we've in the Climate Action Fund is one of the areas we're looking to try and invest in, to build up that resource capability at a local level, as well as having already done so now, or we're starting to employ people, but by having got the funds from central government to build up SEAI and the energy section of the department, because that needed to be done. A lot of frustration about the delays on this, we've seen it, everyone has seen it, is because we haven't had sufficient human resources attached to the challenge. And I hope that's one of my focuses that I want to change.
Super. And I do think we have seen a lot greater ambition in all sorts of, across the energy space, with whether it's retrofitting of houses, and there's massive resources now going into supporting people and communities to get on board with that. There could be a lot more at a local level to support groups and communities. We don't have that local structure. Really, we have local authorities, but they don't have powers across the country to actually get people together and start doing that on a collective scale and really holding people's hands through that. One of the I think the reason that people are bringing up data centers is because it brings up this issue of justice, and it's around climate justice, and it's also about fairness and access to, like, we have a renewable resource that is good, but it's finite, and we need to make sure that the energy that we are generating in Ireland is clean, it's renewable, and it's going to power the lives that we have currently and the people that we have. And there's a fear or concern that the data centers will suck up all the good renewable energy first, and that they'll use batteries and they'll exploit people to get the materials to go into those batteries, as well as for electric vehicles. That leads to a continued injustice in our system, and nobody here, I think, wants us to have an energy system in 10 years' time that maintains the level of injustice that the one we have today is based on, which is based on extractivism and taking resources from other parts of the world and really impacting communities elsewhere, so that we can power ourselves guilt-free as such, and they're really serious questions that we do need to answer and have conversations around.
They are. Unfortunately, I am going to have to run here in a second, but can I finish with this thought just on that? You're right, Kate, that this new economy has to be a better economy in so many different ways, ethically, equality-wise, and efficiency-wise, and security-wise. That ethical one, you're right. We have to really focus on our power being used to heat our homes first and foremost, and help us move around in a way that's collegiate and effective. On the digital side, I'm fortunate, I suppose, I'm Minister for Communications, Climate, and Transport, so I can see the crossover. Yes, we have to make sure that those businesses play their part in a way that as good social citizens. But the other aspect of that, I think, is really critical, and it's really difficult, is around the ethics of who owns the data and what are the rules around data management. And that's really complex and really technically difficult. Sometimes when you start looking at how you regulate the internet, it's not easy. But I think we do need to get that part right. And I think one of the ways we can get it right is around one of the areas data is going to be used, the Internet of Things, in the transport system, in home energy management systems, in a whole range of different applications of the data is what's really interesting. Can we stitch in there mechanisms where it is citizen-centered ownership of data and real trust, in terms of the data is not done on a business model, which is all about getting as much advertising to you as possible, or getting as much money out of you as possible, done in a way where it is shared, because we do have to share data. We have to share information to make this work. Like the energy efficiency work will work really well when my deep freeze shuts off for 2 hours, or when my heat pump shuts off if there's a difficulty on the grid for whatever reason. Now, for that to work, I have to be really confident. Yeah, I'm sharing this data in a way that is actually part of a really ethical, digital, clean, green revolution. That's one other element that I tend to think a lot about and work a lot on, because it's probably the most complex. It's really difficult how you maintain the various qualities you want in this digital revolution. You want transparency, you want open access, you want privacy, and you want security. And that's the key part of it, as well as
one other question, see if you put a date on it for me, because it's coming up in the chat a few times, is when are we going to see supports for microgeneration? When are microgenerators going to be able to actually participate? Not even just microgenerators, small generators, rooftop scale stuff. When are we going to see that? So we can all start planning tomorrow. We'll read the book. And what are we looking at?
my advisor, the Tipperary Energy, if I get this wrong, and maybe he'll follow up if I have and correct me, but my instinct is that's fairly close. That's early in the new year at the latest.
Okay, I think that would be very welcome. I know it would be very welcome to a lot of groups that have been trying to get generation at a small scale across the country. And I think if we start small, we will grow bigger. And I think we need both scales. It's not just about the kilowatts. It's about getting people involved in the transition, benefiting from it, and having an active role.
I've lost my power. The lights have gone off
okay.
here. So I hope that's not. Oh no, it's turned back on. I moved.
That's great. Okay, well, I think.
Power.
Yeah. Thanks very much. I think I'm going to.
I have to go and vote. I'm in trouble.
Okay, I'm going to hand the last word over to Molly, if that's okay. Just as we wrap up today, we've had a lot of policy discussions here, and I think it's quite clear that there's a lot of issues. People are very rightly raising lots of questions about policy and about barriers. But you have seen groups across Europe thrive despite some of those barriers in various places, and I just wonder if you could just share a smattering of some of those projects from some of your favorites. I know you talked about Edinburgh and you talked about Belgium, but maybe one or two more.
Yeah, you just
try and unmute Eamon.
Yeah, you just have to mute the minister there while he goes.
Unfortunately, he's hiding.
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons that I put this book together was because I used to have the privilege of traveling around Europe and meeting people that were doing these projects. And yeah, I don't know if I have to, that one that you mentioned in Copenhagen, the Middelgrunden one, where the offshore is owned by the cooperative, that's also another favorite of mine. And I think it's wrong to equate community energy with small. That's not necessarily true, and we shouldn't accept that framing either, because then they say like, okay, you need a little bit of small and the big guys can have the rest. Like, this transition is an opportunity for us to get more fairness and us to really take ownership of the energy system. And I'd say, like, it's not true that there's an enabling framework already in place in Ireland for community energy. There needs to be one put in place, and you have a big opportunity now to hold Minister Ryan to that promise that he has under EU law. And yeah, I would encourage you to use that opportunity in the next year, and then hopefully it'll make the rules of the game so much easier, so there can be a flourishing of projects in Ireland as well. But from his answers, I think you've all got a big job to do.
Yeah, I think that's clear. We've been banging this drum for a while here, and we have had various ministers who have made lots of promises, and I think this minister means it when he says it'll. He wants to see it happen, but we have quite significant institutional barriers as well that are in the way. So it's not one person's job; it's actually a whole host of people, and I think we need a whole movement of the likes of those who've taken the time to join this call today, and those who are already involved in energy communities, to really start to really make sure that we actually see this happen kind of sooner, really, really soon. I'm going to wrap up now. I think what I've noticed from some of the chat, and I just want to apologize that I didn't get to read out any of the questions. A lot of them were long-winded. I hope I covered most of them in the questions here. But what I have noticed in the chat is that a lot of people are trying to make connections. You're maybe, and you didn't know that somebody else is in Kerry just down the road. And what we would love to be able to do is to facilitate those connections to happen more and more. We're here as a kind of a go-between, if you want, a matchmaker, if you like. We have a lot of those contacts. Myself and friends there at Derry, I know, also will know a lot of them, and we really are here to help put people in touch with each other. I know the energy communities that I know of are always looking for members to join, and I also know that there's lots of people who would be really keen to get involved. I think it's starting to get really exciting here in Ireland, and despite the barriers that we talked about, I can see and feel a huge wave of people who are really really passionate and really keen. And I think what's really interesting to me from reading the book is that communities come together for lots of different reasons, but most of the time their motivations are the same, and they're mostly because they want their area to do better. They want to make connections and talk to and be involved with their local community. They want to have jobs and resources and benefits shared within their area, and those are all really, really positive things about how do we build our communities better. And most of the groups, I think, that are successful have those fundamental building blocks, but also have that sort of shared vision. And I think we have a lot of that here in Ireland. I know we can see it across lots of different community sectors. And so channeling that into the community energy sector, I think, is a really exciting space to be. And I think, yeah, with that, I think I'll leave it. I'll let you all go on your merry way. We're just over an hour here, so I'm keen to wrap up. Thank you very much, and thanks to everybody for joining.